Hello, I'm Charles Rogers, and I am tasked with sharing an introduction to intrafamilial rape, um, a very troublesome subject which happens to be growing in frequency in our communities and in our homes. I hope by the end of this discussion and participation work that we'll be able to have a better grasp on just how devastating this subject can be. When we begin to think about intrafamilial rape, the goals that we want to have in this discussion are: one, understand the definition of child sexual abuse, and two, identify the signs and symptoms of child sexual abuse, to understand the major psychosocial impact of child sexual abuse upon the child, and possibly examine some of the concepts that may be going through the mind of the perpetrator, and four, to formulate a possible analysis of the situation and treatment plan should you become involved in such a situation. First, I want to start with the story of TJ. He's a 34-year-old single Caucasian male. He was discovered one day on the back pew of a church in which I was the associate pastor. TJ had been coming to church several weeks in a row, and we had noticed him in the back, not mixing with anyone. He was moderately dressed. He usually showed up in blue jeans and a nice shirt, seemed to be fairly well-groomed, but kept to himself, quiet. He would sing when the church sang, and he would participate in the prayers of the church, but that was about it. And usually along about invitation time, TJ would be out the back door, so no one could get to him. But one day I purposed to sit in the back of the church during the latter part of the service and began to contact TJ by simply shaking his hand and introducing myself. And I began to hear a little bit of his story. And TJ informed me that he was a convicted sexual predator and that he had been out of prison about 9 months. He was living alone in a trailer, and that he really wanted to try to find a way to get back into church, but he was too embarrassed and he was too guilty, and he wanted to find a way to participate in worship without violating his parole. Well, I mentioned TJ's case to the senior pastor, and we both decided that it was definitely worth an effort to engage TJ and see what we could do to help him if we could. And as he and I talked over several months, TJ opened up and began to reveal his story in a way that only he could bring it forth. He was fully withdrawn from people. He didn't like crowds. He wouldn't go outside of his trailer except to come to church, which was interesting. We had a congregation of about 75 people at that time, although he always remained about 3 to 4 pews away from anybody, and he never participated in church functions such as meals or extra times of gathering. But as I got to know TJ, his story starts when he was very young. He was about 4 years of age, and his mother was alone. His father had left him when he was 1, and his mother had taken to prostitution to survive and try to feed TJ. Well, from time to time, she would have to leave the house, and she would hire a babysitter, and it was a local teenager, a male, that would come in and stay with TJ. And at that point, TJ's not really clear about what happened, other than to remember that basically he can't remember. He can't recall, other than to have feelings that would bring forth tears and some anger. And then he would begin to recall his life at about the age of 15. And he lived on from the age of 15. And at the age of 32, he was caught, so he says, by family with a young girl from another part of his family. And at that point, he was convicted and sent to prison. TJ is a great friend of mine now, and I've known him for over 10 years, and we've had opportunities to talk on and attempt to reintegrate him into society. It's been very difficult for TJ along the way. But these are the kind of people that are lurking in our churches, and they just want a place. We need to find a place for them where they can worship God and feel safe. And as well, the church can feel safe. And as I worked with the senior pastor and we began to broaden the information about TJ in the congregation to our deacons and others who might have some role of authority, we all agreed it was well worth the effort to try to make arrangements so that TJ could not violate his parole, but at the same time know that the church loved him and cared for him. And we were successful to do that. We always assigned someone to be with him and to let him know that even though he couldn't participate where the children were going to be, he could participate where the adults were. And we deliberately tried to make sure that he was aware of certain functions that he could be a part of. As defined by the National Center for Victims of Crime, child sexual abuse is a crime which encompasses several types of sexual activity, including voyeurism, sexual dialogue, fondling, touching of the genitals, vaginal, anal, or oral rape, and forcing children to participate in pornography or prostitution. Now, this diagnosis has been broadened up since 2012 into this mode so that a broader picture can be taken of these children and a wider umbrella of protection can be provided as we try to make sure that they have healthy, relatively normal lives. There's some facts that you need to be aware of regarding child sexual abuse. When we think about the 90,000 cases that are usually reported each year, it's well known that these cases that are being reported are falling way under the actual number. And there are certain reasons that we can see. One is fear of reporting. When we think of the intrafamilial situation, the child within the family, who knows what uncle or what brother or what aunt or what sister is going to wind up facing significant trauma just in the fact of being brought out as the perpetrator of a crime. And while we can sit here and think, well, why not? That seems perfectly normal. If they're doing wrong, they ought to be. The structure of the family is one that thrives upon itself. And when one family member hurts, another family member is going to hurt. And through this structure, there can be a lot of barrier to bringing out the one that might be guilty. There's fear of separation. There's fear of retribution within the family. There's fear of public humiliation for the entire family. And this becomes quite a significant barrier as we think about these things. A second aspect that comes to mind is legal validation. It's very difficult to validate intrafamilial rape because of the nature of the individuals that are doing, most of the individuals that are doing this type of crime. They're usually family members. And because of that, again, the outing process is one that is a tremendous barrier. Trying to find a child that will actually point a finger at an adult or another child that is hurting them is extremely difficult. And there is a pervasive tendency in some law enforcement situations to not trust the child, which is a tremendous error and is being picked up on more and more by the community to recognize that in less than 1% of the cases that are being reported in intrafamilial rape is there a false report being made. So far and away, if there's going to be an error made, the error needs to be made on trusting the child. and listening to what the child has to say and creating an environment in which the child has the ability to speak. An estimated 25% of girls and 16% of boys experience sexual abuse before they're 18 years old. And as we see this beginning to happen, we understand that boys are more underreported, probably due to the reporting techniques. Usually the interviewers, are female, the cross-gender embarrassment, the pride issues that come about in some of this, and then of course the peer pressure to stand up and take your lumps and move on and just be a man about it and get over it, are all issues that play into underreporting. All victims reported to law enforcement. If we look at them, 67% are under age 18, 34% under age 12, and 14% are under age 6. Pretty extensively, the offenders who victimized children under age 6, 40% of them were under age 18. So we can see almost a near peer event going on in almost 40% of intrafamilial rapes. And again, this is so close in age ranges that the effects of bullying and peer pressure are strong, and the desire to be liked by someone and to not risk ruining your future with a group or a gang is strong to prevent reporting happening in these age groups. In a 3-state study of reported rape, survivors under the age of 12 reveal these facts about their offenders. 96% were known to their victims. So 96% of the offenders committing intrafamilial rape are going to be known to their victims. 50% were acquaintances or friends, 20% were fathers, and 16% were relatives. When we think about that again, we can see that such a strong grouping are right there in the family structure. People that are known to be committing these crimes. The parent's connection or lack thereof to the child is going to contribute significantly to the risk of the child being involved in one of these situations. If the parents are inadequate, they just don't have the capability to do their parental duties for whatever reason. It may be due to drug use, maybe due to mental incapacity. It may be due to the parents themselves having issues that are keeping them from being adequate to perform as parents for their children. There can be parental unavailability, remote working sites, military structure. There can be all sorts of first responder situations where parents are gone long hours and not at home. The imprisonment, we see large populations of ethnic groups that are now in prison, and parents are no longer available to be a part of their child's world of influence. A parent-child conflict. We'll see later that anger and aggression can be part of this, and in the conflict, the child rape may be a source of the punishment toward the child. And poor parent-child relationships, the child becoming the parent becoming the child, or the monitoring relationship is not a good one, and the parent continues to put the child into a risky environment in which they will wind up being raped. And sexual abuse will usually occur between the ages of 7 and 13, and this is what I was referring to earlier. On the one side of the situation, we can see grooming begins, and this is where the perpetrator begins to give unusual attention to the child, the target that they're looking toward raping. They begin gifting and meeting needs above and beyond the child. Usually this is going to be a situation of the babysitter or the favorite uncle, things like that. And that's not to say that every babysitter that gives a gift or every favorite uncle is one who's going to head down the path of child sexual abuse. But certainly these are attributes that are seen among those particular kinds of people when child sexual abuse has occurred. So any kind of grooming activity, and parents can be asked, is there anyone that seems real special in your child's life that they just seem to really want to be around, although when they're around them, they have some unusual behaviors, those sorts of things. Then the other side, the coercion side, is where the child gets into a threat or manipulation sequence, where the perpetrator begins to threaten the child with something in their world that could be taken away. It can be parental hurting, can be loss of toys or privileges, certain things along the way, and it's not really known, but it is known that grooming can go into coercion if the child becomes uncooperative along the path. Also aggression and violence, threats to hurt the child, threats to hurt other people on behalf of the child if they don't cooperate with the rape. Those sorts of things can be seen in this arena of the 7 to 13-year-old. Girls are particular victims of incest and or intrafamily sexual abuse much more frequently than boys. When we break this down, 33 to 50% of the perpetrators who will sexually abuse girls are family members. We've seen that already. And 96% are people that are known to them somehow, some way, through some connection. Only 10 to 20% of those who sexually abuse boys are intrafamily perpetrators. Not sure what's behind that in the big picture, other than the possibility that boys tend to have a bigger circle in this age range, 7 to 15, 7 to 13 years of age. They tend to be reaching out to other places, other things, other experiences, while girls tend to be involuted into family development, watching the mothering characteristics in the home and other female influences in the home. But other than that, there's no real clear evidence as to why the numbers seem to go these directions. Now, if we're looking at children that are being sexually abused, there's some behavioral changes that can be seen and need to be watched for. Unusual nervousness or aggressive behavior toward adults. The scene of the young child, a 4, 5, 6-year-old, who when a family member comes in the room and the child, everybody else accepts them, but the child tends to back away. Or if they're forced into a situation of accepting them, they'll not make eye contact or begin to remove themselves as quickly as possible. There'll be some unique body movements away from the individual that they're scared of, or for whatever reason, they'll begin acting out or behave in aggressive or antisocial ways. Particularly boys will do that in those types of environments. Early and age-inappropriate sexual provocativeness, we can see, particularly in the realm of the girls, the dressing far beyond their years, unusual heavy makeup at a very young age, body exposure with clothing, inappropriate clothing, things like that. They may actually, if they're in an advanced grooming phase, they may actually make unusual body contact with the perpetrator and not have any, seem to have any boundary limits in those types of behaviors. Also in this group, alcohol consumption and the use of other drugs. Again, typically the older teenagers, but certainly alcoholism is down into the 4, 5, and 6-year-old age range now, and the attempt to withdraw into a fantasy land and not engage in the public conversation, whatever's going on, or the activity is another common behavior and can be enhanced by drug use or alcoholism. The consequences. In general, chronic depression, low self-esteem, sexual dysfunction in later life, young adulthood, those areas, or the development of multiple personalities in compensatory is a compensatory mechanism that's seen frequently in children of sexual abuse. 20% of all victims will develop serious long-term psychological problems. Probably one of the more prominent ones is dissociative responses, other signs of PTSD. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. There can be some chronic states of arousal in which they don't sleep. They're unusually moving all the time, fidgety. They can have nightmares. They can have some flashbacks. And of course, these are symptoms you know of from PTSD as well. But these can stand out alone. Venereal disease obviously is not a psychological problem, but the long-term effects of venereal disease from child sexual abuse very likely is going to go untreated. And of course, syphilis will cause some bodily structural damage as well as degeneration of the brain. And gonorrhea can cause infertility and again, some bodily damages due to the chronic infection states that the child will be in and out of. Needless to say, those types of long-term infections will begin to bring about depressions and all these other things that we're talking about in the child's life as they grow older, because now they're not going to get rid of these things. They're going to be with them until they die. There can be an anxiety over sex and the performance of the sex act in young adults or newly marrieds that didn't realize what was going on. There can be some failure in that arena for them. Fear of exposing the body during medical exams. This is an area that physicians see from time to time, particularly in children that really should not have a major moral boundary to this, especially in the presence of parent and physician at the same time. However, it is seen and it should raise a red flag that when we're having trouble going to the doctor or going to where the child knows they're going to be examined, someone should raise a question about, is there any problem? Is there somebody bothering them? Is there an unusual buddy who's been bribing them with anything, trying to groom them along the way? Those sorts of things. To begin to ask those questions and see if the child is having some issues in that area. Well, let's get back to TJ. TJ is, as mentioned before, he's had some problems. We know at the age of about 4 to 6, somewhere in there, as far as he can remember. He can remember his mother as a prostitute. He can remember living alone. He can remember a babysitter would come over. He doesn't really remember the face of the babysitter. And he loses any memory until about the age of 15 or 16. And he doesn't recall anything about his life at that point. Now, over the years, several things have been attempted with TJ to try to get him to recall some of what might have happened in those 11 or 12 years. What is known from medical records is that TJ was severely sexually abused. And at one time, it's thought that his mother actually was selling him to pay for her drug usage. And at 16, he ran away from home and began a pathologic recovery process. And so as we begin to think about TJ, we're going to ask some questions about assessment tools. How can we help him? And what help does he want? And I want you thinking about that right now, because as we get ready to engage in a discussion about this, we're going to come back to these ideas and questions and go forward with how we as the church could possibly engage TJ to let him know that God still loves him and he has a place in God's kingdom. I want to mention quickly a tool of assessment that works pretty good. It's a nice, quick way to work with someone when you're trying to just figure out where they are, what's going on, how chaotic is their thought process, and just to kind of use your hand. And in using your hand, we wave at everybody just about. So when you wave at people, the thumb is God, and of course, the index finger is self, and then others and circumstances and environment. And you simply want to probe through just friendly questions of how they are with each of these ideas. Who are they with God? Do they have a church? Or do they know of anyone who goes to church? Their self. How do they feel about themselves? Are they having a good day? Are they having a bad day? How do they see themselves in relation to other people? And then others, as we work down through TJ, we would see that he's embarrassed and guilty with God, and he doesn't know if God can forgive him. And with self, he's not happy with himself because he has a big piece of memory that he can't find, and he has a lot of doubt about who he is and what's going on. And in one aspect, he has separated himself from his history, and we'll talk about that in group as we get to that. How is he with others? He's scared of other people. He has a phobia of people and crowds, and he doesn't trust himself to behave and to do right. Not that he has an ongoing desire to hurt anybody. In fact, he's so scared because he doesn't understand his past that he will do it again, and he doesn't understand what led him into it to begin with. His circumstances. TJ lives alone. He's in a trailer. He only comes to places when people bring him. He has no transportation of his own, and he's fed, and his nutrition is fine, but that's all. That's his existence. His environment is one of isolation, and he is scared, and he watches TV most of the day and stays inside. He won't even go to walk a 30-foot path to his mailbox. He just doesn't want to get out of the house. He finds safety within his house. It's almost a prison syndrome, where he found safety in his cell, in his jail cell, and the structure of the environment he was within in the prison. So now he's recreated that for himself in his trailer environment. Now, this is a good tool to use when you're talking to people. You can ask basic introductory questions and get a lot of information quickly about who they are and how they're thinking and what their environment and circumstances look like. So when we think about TJ, what tool would we help? Would we want to do nouthetic counseling, possibly CBT? Is there some others that come to mind? And again, I'm throwing these thoughts out right now because I want you to be thinking about what would work, what would help TJ at this time. There is an acute process when you deal with a child or a young teen that goes through something like this, and how are you going to manage them? Again, we'll address this more in in our group time together, but the family systems therapy is a good way to begin to assess how things are working in the family. Who's the parents? What are their functions? Are there any brothers and sisters? Are there any other players in this family grouping that are significant to the child that you're working with? So that's another element when we work with them acutely. Help the child know that they have a place of safety, and that they're not going to be judged, and that they're going to be loved through the process, and that you're going to let them make their way in this process rather than forcing them to do something that will just recreate verbally and psychologically what they've been going through physically. Well, I want to thank you for listening today. I hope we've stimulated some thoughts. And now as we get ready to engage in discussion, we can continue to think about TJ, or if you have a personal experience that you would like to discuss for a few moments, we'd be happy to take care of that.